films about writing. It's Joachim Trier's debut film about two friends in Oslo who both want to become writers. Trier has since gone on to make major international hits like The Worst Person in the World and Sentimental Value. Reprise is very different from adaptation, but it circles a similar feeling, the pressure, ambition, and confusion that come with wanting to make good art. Reprise is currently available to stream on Mubi, my sponsor for this video. Mubi is a global streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema, where every film is handpicked by a curator rather than an algorithm. It's a place to find films that are harder to find elsewhere, and a great way to expand your taste in cinema. You can try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/lofi cinema. That's mubi.com/lofi cinema for a whole month of great cinema for free.
how the fuck do you write so many books so fast? I think, I've had a really good 6 months. I've written 3 chapters, and you've finished 3 books in that
I try to get out there and I try to get 6 pages a day, and I try to get them fairly clean. So if the manuscript is 360 pages long, that's basically 2 months' work.
And you do hit 6 pages a day?
I usually do.
You don't ever have a day where you sit down there and it's like constipation and you write a sentence and you hate the sentence and
Okay.
you check your email and you wonder if you had any talent after all, and maybe you should have been a plumber.
Okay, hold up a second. Because what George Martin just said, every creative person's been there. And the question he's asking is exactly what I want to understand. Why is the creative process so effortless for some people and so painfully slow for others? Why do ideas sometimes flow right through you and other times it feels like this? And more importantly, what do you do when the creative flow doesn't come?
I'm open to suggestions.
Sometimes it really does arrive like magic. One morning, Paul McCartney wakes up with a melody in his head.
Sort of went to the piano, found the chords to it,
And he plays it for his bandmates, thinking he probably heard it somewhere. But no one recognized it because it wasn't from anywhere. It was his. He didn't have the lyrics yet, so he just called it.
I called it Scrambled Eggs. Scrambled eggs.
Later, it became.
Yesterday, all my troubles seem so.
This reminded me of this David Lynch clip.
Ideas come to us. We don't really create an idea. We just catch them, like fish. No chef ever takes credit for making the fish. It's just preparing the fish.
What kind of fish?
I know this might sound a little woo-woo, but something about it felt true. He wasn't talking about creating ideas. He was talking about tuning into them. I thought, okay, maybe there's something to this. So I tried it myself. Meditation, silence, long walks. I was trying to become the antenna, the pipe. I believed that if I waited quietly, the flow would come. I waited for the fish. And then... Nothing. So, what do you do when the muse doesn't show up? Because when you're stuck long enough, it doesn't feel like a phase anymore. It starts to feel like, almost like a sign.
Maybe you should have been a plumber.
Okay, let's try again. So Paul McCartney did come up with the music in his dream, but what about the scrambled eggs? How did he arrive from scrambled eggs to yesterday? Turns out while the melody did come to him in a dream, the lyrics, that part took him months. He had to show up every day, try new lines, play with the phrasing.
Waffle fry. Oh my darling, how I love your thighs.
So it's not like there are people who are so talented that ideas just effortlessly come to them. Even those that are occasionally struck by inspiration still have to put in the hard work. So now I'm thinking, okay, let's check the man who writes
6 pages a day.
How the fuck
does he do that? So now I'm going through his book on writing and I come across this quote. Amateurs sit and wait for inspiration. The rest of us just get up and go to work. So basically he treats his creative process not as this artsy, inspiration-driven thing, but as his 9 to 5. I wonder why he does that. Well, he is of course not the only one.
I try to be reasonably disciplined and write sort of office hours for most of it, and then not do kind of all-nighters or crazy hours.
I like to write first thing in the morning. I am at my desk at 4 o'clock every day, 365 days a year. That is my process. That's my time. And by working early in the morning, I signal myself that this is the most important thing you're going to do today.
Even David Lynch, who talks about creativity as something you catch rather than force, had his own disciplined routine, sitting in the same diner every day at exactly 2:30 and scribbling ideas on napkins. Okay, sure. Routines help with discipline and staying consistent, but I started to wonder, is there something else going on? Why would so many artists take something as fun and spontaneous as creativity and turn it into a strict 9-to-5 routine? Is there some meta layer, some underlying reason to turning this joyful process into something that almost feels mundane? I decided to go for a walk to let that sink in, clear my head a little. Somehow I found myself in a store looking for something to drink, but
Why are you telling me this?
bear with me. So I found myself in a store looking for something to drink. I knew I wanted something, but I wasn't sure what exactly. So I'm standing there in front of the shelf and I am completely frozen. And suddenly I realized, oh, maybe this is what they're doing. What if creative block isn't about having no ideas? Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's too many. If you have an extended deadline in your head, your brain switches to a perfectionist mode. The infinite possibilities overwhelm your head, and so no idea seems good enough. No idea stands out. You think you're mediocre, you should have been a plumber.
Maybe you should have been a plumber.
Instead, if you've got a system, say 6 pages by 5 o'clock, your brain switches gears. It stops asking what's the best possible idea and starts asking, how do I get these 6 pages done by 5? When those writers treat their work as 9 to 5, they're trying to take the burden of making a choice out of the equation by introducing a limitation and forcing their brain to work within those constraints.
George, we're going to have to wrap this up pretty soon. Is there anything that you've always wanted to ask me?
So I guess it's not about waiting for flow, but creating your own state of flow. And some days it might just be scrambled eggs, but eventually it'll become
game.
If you could have a patch, though, from between now and TI, what kind of things would you like to see changed?
I think that offlane needs to be more playable. Like they're trying to do it, but people keep finding ways of making your offlane sad, and I think that's a little bit boring for Dota in general, because like before you could like pick some Earth Shaker and like shabloom, and now it's like, okay, I'm the Undying offlane. Oh my god, it's so nice to watch Bat Boom. The game is happening right now. It's so fun, right? Sorry about that. Undying offlane. So like we want the game to be a little bit more fun, and there is 2 roles that are not playing right now. They're just surviving, which is 3 and 4.
I do think, though, that despite everything, you guys are like super fun. This is biased. I'm being biased right now. You are like the most fun team to watch. You guys bring out the fun strats. You guys got all the secrets. You're running at the people. It's great. Are you guys having fun at the very least in this beautiful Blast tournament? Most fun ever?
Yeah, it's fun. When you win, it's fun. So
you're gonna win today, right?
Yeah, today we're gonna have a lot of fun.
All right, good. I like the confidence. Thank you very much for your time, KJ. Good luck in your game. Hell yeah, hell yeah. Woohoo!
Yeah, flex on the haters.
Yeah, I mean, they're enjoying themselves. I appreciate that. But Rhea is so biased. And do you want to know why?
Why is that now?
Because I don't think they're actually that fun. She just likes them because Yuma picks Meepo every now and then.
That's the only team that might give her what she wants.
Yeah, that's why she's like, I love you guys. You're the best.
No, pick Meepo.
I worship your ground you walk on.
She's like, if you say this in the interview, I'll make you look good. Just pick Meepo. I'll do it.
She might actually.
That's probably what's
said
happening.
That. I think she actually did say that. That's why she interviewed Yuma yesterday.
It's a classic.
It is.
You gotta abuse your powers where you can.
I mean, I get it, and they're talking about it. Sometimes there are just roles that have to suffer a little bit, and he called out specifically what their 3 and their 4. That's what he felt was sort of pushed to the wayside at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we see how people are playing. Like Whisper, when he plays his Batrider, he's farming the camps behind the lane. There's some games where the offlane can fight. Sometimes it's just full farm. Like there's kind of like 2 modes of the offlane. Teams have kind of different preferences, and it's maybe not as dynamic, but I'm not opposed to seeing that concept if other roles are now getting more life because of it, right? Like, I don't think, you never want your offlane to just to be the aura farmer, and I would say right now offlanes at least have a choice in real items outside of I must just buy auras. So I think we have to kind of also take the positives, because if you change it, they will just go back to being aura bots. So that you kind of need to walk a fine line of where do offlaners sit.
It depends a lot on team dynamic. I think there's other teams that would say, oh, I think we sack our carry a little bit more than our offlane. So I think there's it's up to interpretation, I think, like how you see the game, and should you give more room to this guy or to this guy? It's up to them.
I do think that they see the game very differently, Liquid and LGD, and that's not just in how they want to play it out, but of course what they want to draft for themselves. So let's get into it. Let's see what sort of fun and shenanigans we're going to get from these 2 teams. We're seeing LGD have first pick in this game, number 1. And again, they had those issues yesterday for whatever reasons. If this is just some process they always have to go through as a volatile team, I do think even having the smallest of patches could be an advantage for them. It's just the small differences of min and max T to give them a slight edge.
Yeah, I mean, already like with the Nature's Prophet ban from LGD, that is a read of, they've read the patch and gone, these trees are pretty darn good. We are scared. Like on paper, they're looking at the numbers, and yeah, I mean, it's like the most of all the options. It was probably top 2 additions to the patch.
That is what Keza was talking about in our pre-show.
And against this team too. Like if there's one team where carry, like they will play carry Nature's Prophet, they don't care the matchup. They'll just play it because Mickey Mouse Nature's Prophet, minute 6, I go to Ace, Nisha comes with a haste rune, you already know how it's gonna go, wada boom, wada bam, tier 1 down. They don't want any of that.
But as always, this Nature's Prophet ban potentially could also be like the Lifestealer ban of 7.41, right? Like it could be like,
you never know.
Maybe you've overreacted to reading the patch. Like unless they've gone to lobby, spawned, 2 sets of treants, walked across the map and gone, oh Christ, this is amazing. Like I'm going to assume they've done that, and for that reason...
I hope they tested
Well,
it.
I just hope they've tested it, and it actually makes sense in game, because we haven't tested it yet. We're still on the vibes of reading it.
There's a double-edged sword to that. They are first pick, remember? So if they really did think Nature's Prophet was Imba, they would have just left it in the pool and first picked it for themselves.
Well, there's always the balance, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so it is definitely, it's the balance of hero good and enemy play it.
Yes.
But we don't play it, therefore you ban it.
I wouldn't want to see it on first pick for LGD, that's for sure.
That is true.
would be some crazy patch interpretations.
But first pick Meepo though.
Yeah.
You're Rhea, that's what you want to see. Unlucky.
Okay.
You're not going to see that.
And it's drought time. Well, at least we have seen the kind of extent in which Drow can get shut down. Just pressure the lane. We had one Drow lane where she won, but still lost the game due to kind of skirmishing pressure elsewhere. And then she had one lane where it just went not the way the Drow wanted. The Undying rotated away, got farmed. But even if Ace doesn't want to play Undying because it's just recency bias, you just want to see an offlaner that fights into the lane. Like, just go for kills, go for pressure, invite heroes to your lane. I don't want to see static farm, blob off lane where Drow just gets to be top net worth.
And he absolutely, he plays those heroes, right? A lot of those heroes that you would like to see kind of fall, I would say, into his repertoire. And for Snapfire, it depends. His snap yesterday, it was okay. I don't think it was Whisper level. And if you want to play this hero and flex it around, I do think you need to be like specialized and very good. But Snapfire could still be your 4. Like, it can enable the, the fatty guy, cookie him on a Drow, stick on her, try to get the kills, try to be like very annoying to the hero on the lane. So I don't mind this yet. It doesn't give me like giga confidence because there's a world where you can absolutely close his face with a core if you want to.
Yeah, I think keeping it open is key. Like Ace, he played the Snapfire yesterday. His scoreline was 9-3-5. Like, statistically, it looked fine, but in the game, like, there was this like confusion across, I think, the entire lineup because, of course, Ace normally fills a certain role.
There's a few heroes where your KDA, it will generally be good. Like on Snapfire, you're sitting 2,000 range away, you're throwing your ult, team fight's over, you're getting some kills, some assists, and you go chill again. It's just like Lycan. Yeah. You press form, you get some kills, you might go 10-2 and you lose. It doesn't necessarily mean you play perfect, just because your stats are good.
But that's where it's like Snapfire, it's like you need to keep it open, just need to just respect the options. Because of course, like Snapfire in the 4-role, like, it opens up so many fun offlaners to go for fight. Like, even a Dawnbreaker that's been pretty hit or miss against the Drow, at least in lane, like Snap Dawn, like, you are going to put damage onto Drow, you're going to be able to create fight. Maybe later down the line, like Tofu gets like a Witch Shot to 5 that he played earlier in the group stage but kind of forgot about in the playoffs.
What's up, my comic comrades? Easily one of the most requested episodes for the last year has been a history of Hellboy. But as we've been telling you guys, we've been waiting to do it around the release of his new live-action movie. Well, that time has officially arrived. We also want to thank our friends at Squarespace for sponsoring today's episode. And make sure you stick around at the end for a great offer from them. But without further ado, I give you the history of Hellboy. Hellboy was created by comic great Mike Mignola, and his first appearance was in Dime Press issue 4 in 1993, which was an Italian book before making his first US appearance in San Diego Comic-Con Comics issue 2 of the same year. However, in both those books, he didn't have his iconic red look yet. The red Hellboy we know and love today would make his debut in Next-Men issue 21 in 1993. So this was his first in-color appearance. So if you're a massive Hellboy fan, those are definitely 3 Grail issues that will put a big dent in your wallet. But now, let's take a look at his comic book origin. Hellboy's real name is Anung Un Rama. His mother was Sarah Hughes. You see, his mother was a witch that got her powers from her spouse Azael, who just so happened to be a demon and Duke of Hell. He's also Hellboy's biological father. When Sarah was on her deathbed in the year 1617, she attempted to repent for her sins at the church. She thought this was a good idea because, you know, she got it on with a demon and became pregnant with his child. Simple stuff, nothing crazy. Because of this, Azael was like, "The hell?" Do you see? You see what I did there? But for real, he became pissed and took Sarah's corpse to hell and burned it so his son could be born. Once the half-demon child was born, Azael chopped his son's right arm off and then replaced it with Hellboy's famous right hand of doom. When his demon friends found out about this, he sent his son away, and Azael was then imprisoned in ice. Long story short, his son would eventually be summoned to Earth in the year 1944 to be the being that brings forth the apocalypse. He was summoned by the Mad Monk off the coast of Scotland. The monk was hired by the Nazis to bring forth a weapon to help them change the tide of the war. So the Mad Monk performed the Nazi ritual Project Ragnarok, the purpose of which was to create a doomsday weapon that could end World War II with their victory. The monk performed it, and bam, baby Hellboy appeared. However, the half-baby demon was rescued by the United States military and brought to a base in New Mexico, where he would be named Hellboy and raised by his adoptive father, Professor Bruttenholm, or just Professor Broom. Broom was the founder of a secret division called BPRD, which stands for Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense. Like I just mentioned, he became Hellboy's adoptive father and raised him as his own son and helped him develop and control his powers. Hellboy grew fast and was incredibly inquisitive, loving anything mechanical. With BPRD being a secret organization, Professor Broom was asked by the president to keep Hellboy's existence a secret and not to worry because the US government would handle everything. But Hellboy still met a lot of people, like Einstein. He even threw a rock at Babe Ruth. Eventually, Hellboy would go on to become the world's greatest paranormal investigator. But now, how about some story arcs? Now, even though Hellboy physically matured quickly, he still very much has the mind of a teenager or young adult, but nonetheless becomes BPRD's #1 agent. But Hellboy doesn't work alone. His partners include Abe Sapien, a humanoid fishman, who is probably his most famous ally, as we all know him from the first 2 Hellboy movies. We also have Kate Corrigan, who's a professor of folklore at New York University, but also a liaison between BPRD agents that have powers and everybody else. Then there's Liz Sherman, who we also know from the movies, as Hellboy's love interest that has pyrokinetic abilities. You could even count the Lobster, a pulp hero from the 1930s, who's now one of the most powerful ghosts in the Hellboy universe. I know this is supposed to be story arcs, but I just wanted to talk about some of Hellboy's partners and allies before I started running down some actual stories. You didn't mind, right? I didn't think you would. With that said, during the Seed of Destruction story, Hellboy finds out that Professor Broom went missing during an expedition to the Arctic. But when he returns and Hellboy is saying he's happy to see him, a Lovecraftian frog monster jumps out and kills Professor Broom. What? You don't have killer Lovecraftian frog monsters where you live? That's weird. The search for who killed Broom takes Hellboy, Abe, and Liz to Cavendish Hall Mansion, which is a trap established by a Siberian mystic called Rasputin to lure Hellboy to embrace his own destiny as a doomsday weapon. But this doesn't go over well as Abe impales Rasputin with a harpoon. Liz's firestorm power then incinerates Rasputin's body. In the end, Hellboy would learn of his 300+ year conception. He also finds out that he has 2 half-human siblings, a nun and a priest, who were killed while trying to stop Hellboy's demon father from taking their mother Sarah. Then during the Wake the Devil story, Hellboy is like, I want to know what I'm all about. I want to go on a journey of self-discovery. This takes him to Romania, where he investigates the theft of an ancient box containing the corpse of Vladimir Gurescu. Who is that, you ask? It's a Napoleonic officer who was actually a freaking Nazi vampire before he was quote-unquote killed by the order of a scared Adolf Hitler. He would also find out it was Ilsa Hopstein who stole the ancient box. Ilsa is one of the surviving members of Project Ragnarok, which is what brought Hellboy to Earth in the first place. Hopstein also helped in the vampire Gurescu's resurrection. Going after Gurescu, Hellboy learns that he was reborn because of the goddess Hecate. So he fights said goddess, but she just swallows him, returning him to his own reality. At which point he's like, yeah, I denounce all the dark purposes I was born to perform. After this, Hellboy learns that Liz is dying after losing her powers. And in the story Hellboy Almost Colossus, her powers are returned with the help of Roger the Homunculus, and her life is saved. In the story Hellboy the Right Hand of Doom, we learn more about Hellboy's stone hand and him being a harbinger of the apocalypse. If that sounds cool, don't worry, I'll have plenty of reading recommendations for you at the end. Anyway, we also have Hellboy Conqueror Worm. This story focuses on the 1930s hero the Lobster, who I mentioned earlier, helping Hellboy and Roger the Homunculus. Though not alive, he's a very powerful ghost who guided Hellboy and Roger, as well as helped them defeat the Conqueror Worm, which could turn people into frog monsters with its otherworldly breath. Heck, in that case, I know a few people who are Conqueror Worms. Skipping some stuff here and there, we have Hellboy in Hell, where guess what? He ends up in hell. It's here he comes into contact with what's left of his demonic family and to terms with the destiny he's been shrugging off his entire life. It's actually the story that marks the return of creator Mike Mignola being the ongoing artist for the series. Hellboy has several more stories and series beyond what I mentioned, but this was just an overview of some of the highlights, so don't get your underwear in a bunch if I didn't mention your favorite story or moment. Anyway, how about some powers and abilities? Hellboy is a demon, so his powers are demonic in nature, even though he's not too fond of that, which is one of the reasons he shaves down his horns. Anyway, because of this, he has super strength, being able to throw opponents that weigh up to 500 pounds. He's also been seen throwing boulders at people, Another power he has is his incredible durability, and a healing factor that's comparable to that of Wolverine. An example of his invulnerability is he once ran straight at a MG42 machine gun, taking countless hits from bullets, but didn't slow down, and he just destroyed the gun when he got to it. The true limits of his strength and durability are unclear, but one thing's for sure, he won't go down easy. Along with aging much slower than humans, Hellboy is also able to comprehend ancient magical language. As for weapons, he has an array of mystical items to fight against evil. His two most notable ones would be his Good Samaritan, which is a massive large gun that is known for its immense strength and mystical background, and of course his Right Hand of Doom that can destroy almost anything. It could also bring and control other demons, effectively causing Armageddon, so there's that. The full extent of the Right Hand of Doom's powers is still unknown, which says a lot because we've seen it do a crap ton already. All in all, this demon is no joke. So let's get you started with some Hellboy reading recommendations. Check out Hellboy Seed of Destruction, Hellboy Wake the Devil, Hellboy Chained Coffin, Hellboy The Right Hand of Doom, Hellboy Conqueror Worm, and Hellboy in Hell. That should be enough to get you all started. First up for Wednesday, April 10th, we have Symbiote Spider-Man Issue 1. Everyone knows that Spider-Man's infamous black suit became the wicked web-slinger Venom. But what happened before Peter Parker discovered the black suit's sinister secret? Now we have Red Hood and the Outlaw Issue 33. Running a casino has turned out to be more dangerous than Jason Todd ever imagined, especially when he's the public face of the Iceberg Lounge. Here we have Web of Venom Cult of Carnage Issue 1. A new terror has risen on the fringes of the Marvel Universe, stirring in the depths of space. But evil is also rising on Earth, claiming one victim at a time in the name of the killer called Carnage. And finally, we have the Batman Who Laughs Issue 4. In this issue, Batman is on a desperate hunt through Gotham City, tracking down the dark version of himself known as the Grim Knight. Now, as we said at the open, today's episode is sponsored by Squarespace. There's never been a better time for content creators, business owners, and others to share what they have with the world. And Squarespace has an incredible and effective all-in-one platform from which you can do just that with your very own website. Using one of Squarespace's powerful and award-winning
In a world stripped bare by unseen horror, one man stands alone against the night. This is a third-person retelling of I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, a chilling story inspired by the author's fascination with classic vampire lore, reimagined.
This is Audible.
Blackstone Audio presents Part 1, January 1976. Chapter 1. On those cloudy days, Robert Neville was never sure when sunset came, and sometimes they were in the streets before he could get back. If he had been more analytical, He might have calculated the approximate time of their arrival, but he still used the lifetime habit of judging nightfall by the sky, and on cloudy days that method didn't work. That was why he chose to stay near the house on those days. He walked around the house in the dull gray of afternoon, a cigarette dangling from the corner of his mouth, trailing thread-like smoke over his shoulder. He checked each window to see if any of the boards had been loosened. After violent attacks, the planks were often split or partially pried off, and he had to replace them completely, a job he hated. Today, only one plank was loose. Isn't that amazing, he thought. In the backyard, he checked the hothouse and the water tank. Sometimes the structure around the tank might be weakened, or its rain catchers bent or broken off. Sometimes they would lob rocks over the high fence around the hothouse, and occasionally they would tear through the overhead net, and he'd have to replace panes. Both the tank and the hothouse were undamaged today. He went to the house for a hammer and nails. As he pushed open the front door, he looked at the distorted reflection of himself in the cracked mirror he'd fastened to the door a month ago. In a few days, jagged pieces of the silver-backed glass would start to fall off. Let 'em fall, he thought. It was the last damned mirror he'd put there. It wasn't worth it. He'd put garlic there instead. Garlic always worked. He passed slowly through the dim silence of the living room, turned left into the small hallway, and left again into his bedroom. Once the room had been warmly decorated, but that was in another time. Now it was a room entirely functional, and since Neville's bed and bureau took up so little space, he had converted one side of the room into a shop. A long bench covered almost an entire wall. On its hardwood top, a heavy bandsaw, a wood lathe, an emery wheel, and a vise. Above it, on the wall, were haphazard racks of the tools that Robert Neville used. He took a hammer from the bench and picked out a few nails from one of the disordered bins. Then he went back outside and nailed the plank fast to the shutter. The unused nails he threw into the rubble next door. For a while he stood on the front lawn, looking up and down the silent length of Cimarron Street. He was a tall man, 36, born of English-German stock, his features undistinguished except for the long, determined mouth and the bright blue of his eyes, which moved now over the charred ruins of the houses on each side of his. He'd burned them down to prevent them from jumping on his roof from the adjacent ones. After a few minutes, he took a long, slow breath and went back into the house. He tossed the hammer on the living room couch, then lit another cigarette and had his mid-morning drink. Later, he forced himself into the kitchen to grind up the 5-day accumulation of garbage in the sink. He knew he should burn up the paper plates and utensils too, and dust the furniture and wash out the sinks and the bathtub and toilet, and change the sheets and pillowcase on his bed, but he didn't feel like it. For he was a man, and he was alone, and these things had no importance to him. It was almost noon. Robert Neville was in his hothouse collecting a basketful of garlic. In the beginning, it had made him sick to smell garlic in such quantity. His stomach had been in a state of constant turmoil. Now the smell was in his house and in his clothes, and sometimes he thought it was even in his flesh. He hardly noticed it at all. When he had enough bulbs, he went back to the house and dumped them on the drain board of the sink. As he flicked the wall switch, the light flickered, then flared into normal brilliance. A disgusted hiss passed his clenched teeth. The generator was at it again. He'd have to get out that damned manual again and check the wiring. And if it were too much trouble to repair, he'd have to install a new generator. Angrily, he jerked a high-legged stool to the sink, got a knife, and sat down with an exhausted grunt. First he separated the bulbs into the small, sickle-shaped cloves. Then he cut each pink, leathery clove in half, exposing the fleshy center buds. The air thickened with the musty, pungent odor. When it got too oppressive, he snapped on the air conditioning unit, and suction drew away the worst of it. Now he reached over and took an ice pick from its wall rack. He punched holes in each clove half, then strung them all together with wire until he had about 25 necklaces. In the beginning, he had hung these necklaces over the windows, but from a distance they'd thrown rocks until he'd been forced to cover the broken panes with plywood scraps. Finally, one day, he'd torn off the plywood and nailed up even rows of planks instead. It had made the house a gloomy sepulchre, but it was better than having rocks come flying into his rooms in a shower of splintered glass. And once he had installed the 3 air conditioning units, it wasn't too bad. A man could get used to anything if he had to. When he was finished stringing the garlic cloves, he went outside and nailed them over the window boarding, taking down the old strings, which had lost most of their potent smell. He had to go through this process twice a week. Until he found something better, it was his first line of defense. Defense, he often thought. For what? All afternoon he made stakes. He lathed them out of thick doweling, band-sawed into 9-inch lengths. These he held against the whirling emery stone until they were as sharp as daggers. It was tiresome, monotonous work, and it filled the air with hot-smelling wood dust that settled in his pores and got into his lungs and made him cough. Yet he never seemed to get ahead. No matter how many stakes he made, they were gone in no time at all. Doweling was getting harder to find, too. Eventually, he'd have to lathe down rectangular lengths of wood. Won't that be fun? He thought irritably. It was all very depressing, and it made him resolve to find a better method of disposal. But how could he find it, when they never gave him a chance to slow down and think? As he lathed, he listened to records over the loudspeaker he'd set up in the bedroom. Beethoven's Third, Seventh, and Ninth Symphonies. He was glad he'd learned early in life, from his mother, to appreciate this kind of music. It helped to fill the terrible void of hours. From 4 o'clock on, his gaze kept shifting to the clock on the wall. He worked in silence, lips pressed into a hard line, a cigarette in the corner of his mouth, his eyes staring at the bit as it gnawed away the wood and sent floury dust filtering down to the floor. 4:15. 4:30. It was 4:45. In another hour they'd be at the house again, the filthy bastards. As soon as the light was gone. He stood before the giant freezer, selecting his supper. His jaded eyes moved over the stacks of meats, down to the frozen vegetables, down to the breads and pastries, the fruits and ice cream. He picked out 2 lamb chops, string beans, and a small box of orange sherbet. He picked the boxes from the freezer and pushed shut the door with his elbow. Next, he moved over to the uneven stacks of cans piled to the ceiling. He took down a can of tomato juice, then left the room that had once belonged to Kathy and now belonged to his stomach. He moved slowly across the living room, looking at the mural that covered the back wall. It showed a cliff edge, shearing off to green-blue ocean that surged and broke over black rocks. Far up in the clear blue sky, white seagulls floated on the wind, and over on the right, a gnarled tree hung over the precipice, its dark branches etched against the sky. Neville walked into the kitchen and dumped the groceries on the table, his eyes moving to the clock. 20 minutes to 6. Soon now. He poured a little water into a small pan and clanked it down on a stove burner. Next, he thawed out the chops and put them under the broiler. By this time, the water was boiling, and he dropped in the frozen string beans and covered them, thinking that it was probably the electric stove that was milking the generator. At the table, he sliced himself 2 pieces of bread and poured himself a glass of tomato juice. He sat down and looked at the red second hand as it swept slowly around the clock face. The bastards ought to be here soon. After he'd finished his tomato juice, he walked to the front door and went out onto the porch. He stepped off onto the lawn and walked down to the sidewalk. The sky was darkening and it was getting chilly. He looked up and down Cimarron Street, the cool breeze ruffling his blonde hair. That's what was wrong with these cloudy days. You never knew when they were coming. Oh well. At least they were better than those damn dust storms. With a shrug, he moved back across the lawn and into the house, locking and bolting the door behind him, sliding the thick bar into place. Then he went back into the kitchen, turned his chops, and switched off the heat under the string beans. He was putting the food on his plate when he stopped, and his eyes moved quickly to the clock. 6:25 today. Ben Cortman was shouting. "Come out, Neville!" Robert Neville sat down with a sigh and began to eat. He sat in the living room trying to read. He'd made himself a whiskey and soda at his small bar, and he held the cold glass as he read a physiology text. From the speaker over the hallway door, the music of Schoenberg was playing loudly. Not loudly enough, though. He still heard them outside, their murmuring and their walkings about and their cries, their snarling and fighting among themselves. Once in a while a rock or brick thudded off the house. Sometimes a dog barked. And they were all there for the same thing. Robert Neville closed his eyes a moment and held his lips in a tight line. Then he opened his eyes and lit another cigarette, letting the smoke go deep into his lungs. He wished he'd had time to soundproof the house. It wouldn't be so bad if it weren't that he had to listen to them. Even after 5 months, it got on his nerves. He never looked at them anymore. In the beginning, he'd made a peephole in the front window and watched them. But then the women had seen him and had started striking vile postures in order to entice him out of the house. He didn't want to look at that. He put down his book and stared bleakly at the rug, hearing Verklatenach play over the loudspeaker. He knew he could put plugs in his ears to shut off the sound of them, but that would shut off the music too, and he didn't want to feel that they were forcing him into a shell. He closed his eyes again. It was the women who made it so difficult, he thought. The women posing like lewd puppets in the night on the possibility that he'd see them and decide to come out. A shudder ran through him. Every night it was the same. He'd be reading and listening to music. Then he'd start to think about soundproofing the house. Then he'd think about the women. Deep in his body, the knotting heat began again, and he pressed his lips together until they were white. He knew the feeling well, and it enraged him that he couldn't combat it. It grew and grew, until he couldn't sit still anymore. Then he'd get up and pace the floor, fists bloodless at his sides. Maybe he'd set up the movie projector, or eat something, or have too much to drink, or turn the music up so loud it hurt his ears. He had to do something when it got really bad. He felt the muscles of his abdomen closing in, like tightening coils. He picked up the book and tried to read, his lips forming each word slowly and painfully. But in a moment the book was on his lap again. He looked at the bookcase across from him. All the knowledge in those books couldn't put out the fires in him. All the words of centuries couldn't end the wordless, mindless craving of his flesh. The realization made him sick. It was an insult to a man. All right, it was a natural drive, but there was no outlet for it anymore. They'd forced celibacy on him. He'd have to live with it. "You have a mind, don't you?" he asked himself. "We'll use it." He reached over and turned the music still louder, then forced himself to read a whole page without pause. He read about blood cells being forced through membranes, about pale lymph carrying the wastes through tubes blocked by lymph nodes, about lymphocytes and phagocytic cells. to empty in the left shoulder region near the thorax into a large vein of the blood circulating system. The book shut with a thud. Why didn't they leave him alone? Did they think they could all have him? Were they so stupid they thought that? Why did they keep coming every night? After 5 months, you'd think they'd give up and try elsewhere. He went over to the bar and made himself another drink. As he turned back to his chair, he heard stones rattling down across the roof and landing with thuds in the shrubbery beside the house. Above the noises, he heard Ben Cortman shout, as he always shouted, "Come out, Neville!" "Someday I'll get that bastard," he thought, as he took a big swallow of the bitter drink. "Someday I'll knock a stake right through his goddamn chest. I'll make one a foot long for him, a special one with ribbons on it. The bastard." Tomorrow he'd soundproof the house. His fingers drew into white-knuckled fists. He couldn't stand thinking about those women. If he didn't hear them, maybe he wouldn't think about them. Tomorrow. The music ended, and he took a stack of records off the turntable and slid them back into their cardboard envelopes. Now he could hear them even more clearly outside. He reached for the first new record he could get and put it on the turntable and twisted the volume up to its highest point. "The Year of the Plague" by Roger Lee filled his ears. Violins scraped and whined, timpani thudded like the beats of a dying heart, flutes played weird, atonal melodies. With a stiffening of rage, he wrenched up the record and snapped it over his right knee. He'd meant to break it long ago. He walked on rigid legs to the kitchen and flung the pieces into the trash box. Then he stood in the dark kitchen, eyes tightly shut, teeth clenched, hands clamped over his ears. "Leave me alone. Leave me alone. Leave me alone." No use. You couldn't beat them at night. No use trying. It was their special time. He was acting very stupidly, trying to beat them. Should he watch a movie? No. He didn't feel like setting up a projector. He'd go to bed and put the plugs in his ears. It was what he ended up doing every night anyway. Quickly, trying not to think at all, he went to the bedroom and undressed. He put on pajama bottoms and went into the bathroom. He never wore pajama tops. It was a habit he'd acquired in Panama during the war. As he washed, he looked into the mirror, at his broad chest, at the dark hair swirling around the nipples and down the center line of his chest. He looked at the ornate cross he'd had tattooed on his chest one night in Panama when he'd been drunk. What a fool I was in those days, he thought. Well, maybe that cross had saved his life. He brushed his teeth carefully and used dental floss. He tried to take good care of his teeth because he was his own dentist now. Some things could go to pot, but not his health, he thought. Then why don't you stop pouring alcohol into yourself, he thought. Why don't you shut the hell up, he thought. Now he went through the house, turning out lights. For a few minutes, he looked at the mural and tried to believe it was really the ocean. But how could he believe it with all the bumpings and the scrapings, the howlings and snarlings and cries in the night? He turned off the living room lamp and went into the bedroom. He made a sound of disgust when he saw that sawdust covered the bed. He brushed it off with snapping hand strokes, thinking that he'd better build a partition between the shop and the sleeping portion of the room. Better do this and better do that, he thought morosely. There were so many damned things to do, he'd never get to the real problem. He jammed in his earplugs, and a great silence engulfed him. He turned off the light and crawled in between the sheets. He looked at the radium-faced clock and saw that it was only a few minutes past 10. Just as well, he thought. This way I'll get an early start. He lay there on the bed and took deep breaths of the darkness, hoping for sleep. But the silence didn't really help. He could still see them out there. The white-faced men prowling around his house, looking ceaselessly for a way to get in at him. Some of them probably crouching on their haunches like dogs. eyes glittering at the house, teeth slowly grating together, back and forth, back and forth. And the women. Did he have to start thinking about them again? He tossed over on his stomach with a curse and pressed his face into the hot pillow. He lay there breathing heavily, body writhing slightly on the sheet. Let the morning come. His mind spoke the words it spoke every night. Dear God, let the morning come. He dreamed about Virginia, and he cried out in his sleep, and his fingers gripped the sheets like frenzied talons. Chapter 2. The alarm went off at 5:30, and Robert Neville reached out a numbed arm in the morning gloom and pushed in the stop. He reached for his cigarettes and lit one, then sat up. After a few moments, he got up and walked into the dark living room and opened the peephole door. Outside on the lawn, the dark figures stood like silent soldiers on duty. As he watched, some of them started moving away, and he heard them muttering discontentedly among themselves. Another night was ended. He went back to the bedroom, switched on the light, and dressed. As he was pulling on his shirt, he heard Ben Cortman cry out, "Come out, Neville!" And that was all. After that, they all went away weaker, he knew, than when they had come. Unless they had attacked one of their own. They did that often. There was no union among them. Their need was their only motivation. After dressing, Neville sat down on his bed with a grunt and penciled his list for the day. Lathe at Sears. Water. Check generator. Dowling. Usual. Breakfast was hasty. A glass of orange juice, a slice of toast, and 2 cups of coffee. He finished it quickly, wishing he had the patience to eat slowly. After breakfast, he threw the paper plate and cup into the trash box and brushed his teeth. At least I have one good habit, he consoled himself. The first thing he did when he went outside was look at the sky. It was clear, virtually cloudless. He could go out today. Good. As he crossed the porch, his shoe kicked some pieces of the mirror. Well, the damn thing broke just as I thought it would, he thought. He'd clean it up later. One of the bodies was sprawled on the sidewalk. The other one was half concealed in the shrubbery. They were both women. They were almost always women. He unlocked the garage door and backed his Willis station wagon into the early morning crispness. Then he got out and pulled down the back gate. He put on heavy gloves and walked over to the woman on the sidewalk. There was certainly nothing attractive about them in the daylight, he thought, as he dragged them across the lawn and threw them up on the canvas tarpaulin. There wasn't a drop left in them. Both women were the color of fish out of water. He raised the gate and fastened it. He went around the lawn then, picking up stones and bricks and putting them into a cloth sack. He put the sack in the station wagon and then took off his gloves. He went inside the house, washed his hands, and made lunch, 2 sandwiches, a few cookies, and a thermos of hot coffee. When that was done, he went into the bedroom and got his bag of steaks. He slung this across his back and buckled on the holster that held his mallet. Then he went out of the house, locking the front door behind him. He wouldn't bother searching for Ben Cortman that morning. There were too many other things to do. For a second, he thought about the soundproofing job he'd resolved to do on the house. Well, the hell with it, he thought. I'll do it tomorrow, or some cloudy day. He got into the station wagon and checked his list. Lathe at Sears. That was first. After he dumped the bodies, of course. He started the car and backed quickly into the street and headed for Compton Boulevard. There he turned right and headed east. On both sides of him the houses stood silent, and against the curbs cars were parked, empty and dead. Robert Neville's eyes shifted down for a moment to the fuel gauge. There was still a half tank, but he might as well stop on Western Avenue and fill it. There was no point in using any of the gasoline stored in the garage until he had to. He pulled into the silent station and braked. He got a barrel of gasoline and siphoned it into his tank until the pale amber fluid came gushing out of the tank opening and ran down onto the cement. He checked the oil, water, battery water, and tires. Everything was in good condition. It usually was, because he took special care of the car. If it ever broke down so that he couldn't get back to the house by sunset. Well, there was no point in even worrying about that. If it ever happened, that was the end. Now he continued up Compton Boulevard, past the tall oil derricks, through Compton, through all the silent streets. There was no one to be seen anywhere. But Robert Neville knew where they were. The fire was always burning. As the car drew closer, he pulled on his gloves and gas mask and watched through the eyepieces the sooty pall of smoke hovering above the earth. The entire field had been excavated into one gigantic pit. That was in June 1975. Neville parked the car and jumped out, anxious to get the job over with quickly. Throwing the catch and jerking down the rear gate, he pulled out one of the bodies and dragged it to the edge of the pit. There he stood it on its feet and shoved. The body bumped and rolled down the steep incline until it settled on the great pile of smoldering ashes at the bottom. Robert Neville drew in harsh breaths as he hurried back to the station wagon. He always felt as though he were strangling when he was here, even though he had the gas mask on. Now he dragged the second body to the brink of the pit and pushed it over. Then, after tossing the sack of rocks down, he hurried back to the car and sped away. After he'd driven a half-mile, he skinned off the mask and gloves and tossed them into the back. His mouth opened, and he drew in deep lungfuls of fresh air. He took the flask from the glove compartment and took a long drink of burning whiskey. Then he lit a cigarette and inhaled deeply. Sometimes he had to go to the burning pit every day for weeks at a time, and it always made him sick. Somewhere down there was Kathy. On the way to Inglewood, he stopped at a market to get some bottled water. As he entered the silent store, the smell of rotted food filled his nostrils. Quickly he pushed a metal wagon up and down the silent, dust-thick aisles, the heavy smell of decay setting his teeth on edge, making him breathe through his mouth. He found the water bottles in back, and also found a door opening on a flight of stairs. After putting all the bottles into the wagon, he went up the stairs. The owner of the market might be up there. He might as well get started. There were two of them. In the living room, lying on a couch, was a woman about 30 years old, wearing a red housecoat. Her chest rose and fell slowly as she lay there, eyes closed, her hands clasped over her stomach. Robert Neville's hands fumbled on the stake and mallet. It was always hard when they were alive, especially with women. He could feel that senseless demand returning again, tightening his muscles. He forced it down. It was insane. There was no rational argument for it. She made no sound except for a sudden hoarse intake of breath. As he walked into the bedroom, he could hear a sound like the sound of water running. Well, what else can I do? He asked himself, for he still had to convince himself he was doing the right thing. He stood in the bedroom doorway, staring at the small bed by the window, his throat moving, breath shuddering in his chest. Then, driven on, he walked to the side of the bed and looked down at her. Why do they all look like Kathy to me? He thought, drawing out the second stake with shaking hands. Driving slowly to Sears, he tried to forget, by wondering why it was that only wooden stakes should work. He frowned as he drove along the empty boulevard, the only sound the muted growling of the motor in his car. It seemed fantastic that it had taken him 5 months to start wondering about it. Which brought another question to mind. How was it that he always managed to hit the heart? It had to be the heart. Dr. Bush had said so. Yet he, Neville, had no anatomical knowledge. His brow furrowed. It irritated him that he should have gone through this hideous process so long without stopping once to question it. He shook his head. No. I should think it over carefully, he thought. I should collect all the questions before I try to answer them. Things should be done the right way, the scientific way. Yeah, he thought. Shades of old Fritz. That had been his father's name. Neville had loathed his father and fought the acquisition of his father's logic and mechanical facility every inch of the way. His father had died denying the vampire, violently, to the last. At Sears he got the lathe, loaded it into the station wagon, then searched the store. There were 5 of them in the basement, hiding in various shadowed places. One of them Neville found inside a display freezer. When he saw the man lying there in this enamel coffin, he had to laugh. It seemed such a funny place to hide. Later, he thought of what a humorless world it was when he could find amusement in such a thing. At about 2 o'clock, he parked and ate his lunch. Everything seemed to taste of garlic. And that set him wondering about the effect garlic had on them. It must have been the smell that chased them off, but why? They were strange, the facts about them. Their staying inside by day, their avoidance of garlic, their death by stake, their reputed fear of crosses, their supposed dread of mirrors. Take that last now. According to legend, they were invisible in mirrors. But he knew that was untrue. As untrue as the belief that they transformed themselves into bats. That was a superstition that logic plus observation had easily disposed of. It was equally foolish to believe that they could transform themselves into wolves. Without a doubt, there were vampire dogs. He had seen and heard them outside his house at night. But they were only dogs. Robert Neville compressed his lips suddenly. Forget it, he told himself. You're not ready yet. The time would come when he'd take a crack at it, detail for detail. But the time wasn't now. There were enough things to worry about now. After lunch, he went from house to house and used up all his stakes. He had 47 stakes. Chapter 3. The strength of the vampire is that no one will believe in him. Thank you, Dr. Van Helsing, he thought, putting down his copy of Dracula. He sat staring moodily at the bookcase, listening to Brahms' second piano concerto, a whiskey sour in his right hand, a cigarette between his lips. It was true. The book was a hodgepodge of superstitions and soap opera cliches, but that line was true. No one had believed in them. And how could they fight something they didn't even believe in? That was what the situation had been. Something black and of the night had come crawling out of the Middle Ages. Something with no framework or credulity. Something that had been consigned, fact and figure, to the pages of imaginative literature. Vampires were passé, Summer's Idols or Stoker's melodramatics, or a brief inclusion in the Britannica, or grist for the pulp writer's mill, or raw material for the B film factories. A tenuous legend, passed from century to century. Well, it was true. He took a sip from his drink and closed his eyes as the cold liquid trickled down his throat and warmed his stomach. True, he thought, but no one ever got the chance to know it. Oh, they knew it was something, but it couldn't be that. Not that. That was imagination. That was superstition. There was no such thing as that. And Before science had caught up with the legend had swallowed science and everything. He hadn't found any Dowling that day. He hadn't checked the generator. He hadn't cleaned up the pieces of mirror. He hadn't eaten supper. He'd lost his appetite. That wasn't hard. He lost it most of the time. He couldn't do the things he'd done all afternoon and then come home to a hearty meal. Not even after 5 months. He thought of the 12 children that afternoon. And he finished his drink in 2 swallows. He blinked, and the room wavered a little before him. "You're getting blotto, Father," he told himself. "So what?" he returned. "Has anyone more right?" He tossed the book across the room. Begone Van Helsing and Mina and Jonathan and blood-eyed Count and all figments, all driveling extrapolations on a somber theme. A coughing chuckle emptied itself from his throat. Outside, Ben Cortman called for him to come out. "Be right out, Benny," he thought, "soon as I get my tuxedo on." He shuddered and gritted his teeth edges together. Be right out. Well, why not? Why not go out? It was a sure way to be free of them. Be one of them. He chuckled at the simplicity of it, then shoved himself up and walked crookedly to the bar. Why not? His mind plodded on. Why go through all this complexity when a flung-open door and a few steps would end it all? For the life of him, he didn't know. There was, of course, the faint possibility that others like him existed somewhere, trying to go on, hoping that someday they would be among their own kind again. But how could he ever find them if they weren't within a day's drive of his house? He shrugged and poured more whiskey in the glass. He'd given up the use of jiggers months ago. Garlic on the windows and nets over the hothouse, and burn the bodies and cart the rocks away, and fraction of an inch by fraction of an inch reduce their unholy numbers. Why kid himself? He'd never find anyone else. His body dropped down heavily on the chair. Here we are, kiddies, sitting like a bug in a rug, snugly, surrounded by a battalion of bloodsuckers who wish no more than to sip freely of my bonded 100-proof hemoglobin. Have a drink, men. This one's really on me. His face twisted into an expression of raw, unqualified hatred. Bastards! I'll kill every mother's son of you before I'll give in. His right hand closed like a clamp, and the glass shattered in his grip. He looked down, dull-eyed, at the fragments on the floor, at the jagged piece of glass still in his hand, at the whiskey-diluted blood dripping off his palm. Wouldn't they like to get some of it, though? He thought. He started up with a furious lurch and almost opened the door so he could wave the hand in their faces and hear them howl. Then he closed his eyes, and a shudder ran through his body. Wise up, buddy, he thought. Go bandage your goddamn hand. He stumbled into the bathroom and washed his hand carefully, gasping as he daubed iodine into the sliced open flesh. Then he bandaged it clumsily, his broad chest rising and falling with jerky movements, sweat dripping from his forehead. I need a cigarette, he thought. In the living room again, he changed Brahms for Bernstein and lit a cigarette. What will I do if I ever run out of coffin nails? He wondered, looking at the cigarette's blue, trailing smoke. Well, there wasn't much chance of that. He had about 1,000 cartons in the closet of Kathy's. He clenched his teeth together. In the closet of the larder. The larder. The larder. Kathy's room. He sat staring with dead eyes at the mural, while the age of anxiety pulsed in his ears. Age of anxiety, he mused. You thought you had anxiety, Lenny boy. Lenny and Benny. You two should meet. Composer, meet corpse. Mama, when I grow up, I want to be a vampire like Dada. Why, bless you, hon. Of course you shall. The whiskey gurgled into the glass. He grimaced a little at the pain in his hand and shifted the bottle to his left hand. He sat down and sipped. Let the jagged edge of sobriety be now dulled, he thought. Let the crumbly balance of clear vision be expunged, but post-haste. I hate 'em. Gradually, the room shifted on its gyroscopic center and wove and undulated about his chair. A pleasant haze, fuzzy at the edges, took over sight. He looked at the glass, at the record player. He let his head flop from side to side. Outside, they prowled and muttered and waited. Poor vampires, he thought. Poor little cusses, pussyfooting round my house, so thirsty, so all forlorn. A thought. He raised a forefinger that wavered before his eyes. Friends, I come before you to discuss the vampire, a minority element if ever there was one, and there was one. But to concision, I will sketch out the basis for my thesis, which thesis is this. Vampires are prejudiced against. The keynote of minority prejudice is this. They are loathed because they are feared. Thus, he made himself a drink, a long one. At one time, the Dark and Middle Ages, to be succinct, the vampire's power was great, the fear of him tremendous. He was anathema, and still remains anathema. Society hates him without ration. But are his needs any more shocking than the needs of other animals and men? Are his deeds more outrageous than the deeds of the parent who drained the spirit from his child? The vampire may foster quickened heartbeats and levitated hair, but is he worse than the parent who gave to society a neurotic child who became a politician? Is he worse than the manufacturer who set up belated foundations with the money he made by handing bombs and guns to suicidal nationalists? Is he worse than the distiller who gave bastardized grain juice to stultify further the brains of those who, sober, were incapable of a progressive thought? Nay, I apologize for this calumny. I nip the brew that feeds me. Is he worse than the publisher who filled ubiquitous racks with lust and death wishes? Really now, search your soul, lovey. Is the vampire so bad? All he does is drink blood. Why then this unkind prejudice, this thoughtless bias? Why cannot the vampire live where he chooses? Why must he seek out hiding places where none can find him out? Why do you wish him destroyed? Ah, see, you have turned the poor guileless innocent into a haunted animal. He has no means of support, no measures for proper education. He has not the voting franchise. No wonder he is compelled to seek out a predatory nocturnal existence. Robert Neville grunted a surly grunt. Sure, sure, he thought. But would you let your sister marry one? He shrugged. You got me there, buddy. You got me there. The music ended. The needle scratched back and forth in the black grooves. He sat there, feeling a chill creeping up his legs. That's what was wrong with drinking too much. You became immune to drunken delights. There was no solace in liquor. Before you got happy, you collapsed. Already the room was straightening out. The sounds outside were starting to nibble at his eardrums. Come out, Neville. His throat moved, and a shaking breath passed his lips. Come out. The women were out there, their dresses open or taken off, their flesh waiting for his touch, their lips waiting for my blood. My blood! As if it were someone else's hand, he watched his whitened fist rise up slowly, shuddering, to drive down on his leg. The pain made him suck in a breath of the house's stale air. Garlic, everywhere the smell of garlic. In his clothes and in the furniture and in his food and even in his drink. Have a garlic and soda. His mind rattled out the attempted joke. He lurched up and started pacing. What am I going to do now? Go through the routine again? I'll save you the trouble. Reading, drinking, soundproof the house, the women, the lustful, bloodthirsty, naked women flaunting their hot bodies at him. No, not hot.
Cold.
A shuddering whine wrenched up through his chest and throat. God damn them! What were they waiting for? Did they think he was going to come out and hand himself over? Maybe I am. Maybe I am. He actually found himself jerking off the crossbar from the door. Coming, girls. I'm coming. Wet your lips now. Outside, they heard the bar being lifted, and a howl of anticipation sounded in the night. Spinning, he drove his fists one after the other into the wall until he'd cracked the plaster and broken his skin. Then he stood there trembling helplessly, his teeth chattering. After a while it passed. He put the bar back across the door and went into the bedroom. He sank down on the bed and fell back on the pillow with a groan. His left hand beat once, feebly, on the bedspread. Oh, God, he thought. How long? How long? Chapter 4